This is obviously quite a significant impact if you're talking about oil and gas exports. However, with the immediate US ban, that's actually not such a large part of Russian exports. So the US is importing approximately 7% of its oil imports from Russia. It's about 8% of the Russian oil exports. So this immediate ban is not a massive impact, but of course it is going to have an impact. Globally, we're looking, of course, at Europe, which makes up a large part of Russia's oil and gas exports, but energy security there is a lot more difficult to maintain without Russian imports because a lot of European countries are very dependent on the Russian oil and gas.
So some of them are talking about phasing it out by the end of the year, so that wouldn't necessarily impact immediately.
Absolutely, that is the UK's position. So the UK, among European countries, has a relatively limited dependence on the Russian imports and is talking about phasing it out until the end of this year. So obviously that is going to take some time. Other countries, for example, Germany, which is highly dependent on these imports, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is saying that is quite difficult to do anything in the short run, not ruling it out entirely, but saying, well, we can't just do a ban straight away because that would obviously influence the German industry very heavily, and that would then have knock-on effects on the global economy as well.
There is a global oil price, gas price set. Is there any chance that they could break away from that ceiling and actually reduce prices and for supply from elsewhere to take its place?
Supply from elsewhere is certainly being brought in, and there's lots of discussions about liquefied natural gas shipping to supply European countries, for example. So that is there, but it's no quick solution. So there's no quick scale up to suddenly account for all of the Russian imports in oil and gas.
Let's talk to Fitch has said today that there's a real risk that Russia could default on its sovereign debt. How serious would that be in terms of the global economy?
We've obviously got the impact on the oil and gas market, but we also need to consider that this war has impacts on other supply chains as well. We've all seen over the last 2 years how interdependent global supply chains really are. So a large exporting country not exporting, that is very difficult. We are looking, for example, also with Ukraine. Ukraine is a large exporter of agricultural products. So that is really impacting food supply chains. And already in many countries, we have seen food prices rise quite steeply before this war. And now we're looking at one of the largest exporters of wheat, of sunflower oil, of corn, not being able to produce, not being able to actually transport things from outside the country. So that is very, very difficult and is impacting particularly countries that don't have many options of alternative supplies. And not just countries, but we've also heard from the World Food Programme, which is currently getting about 50% of its wheat from Ukraine, which obviously isn't happening right now. So they are expecting rises from about 700 million US dollar in their cost to feed people around the world. So the impacts of all of this are huge.
Yeah. And Russia tonight is saying that it's considering a ban on exports itself. So we know that they are also big exporters of grain and wheat and also some things like aluminium. Would that not hurt Russia itself, and what flow and effect would that have?
Of course, it would hurt Russia itself. I mean, with any sort of sanctions that you're putting in, any sort of export-import bans, you're always hitting both sides. That's just an effect of the global trade. If we're talking particularly about the metals, there's a lot of metals, both from Ukraine and Russia, that go into global manufacturing industries. One particularly crucial one that we have heard a lot about recently is the microchip industry. So already there's lots of shortages. There's car manufacturers having to idle their production lines because they don't have sufficient microchips. And there's a lot of inputs that are coming from Ukraine and Russia, or should come from Ukraine and Russia, that are going into that. For example, supply of neon, which is crucial in manufacturing microchips, comes from that part of the world and is now disrupted. So this is very large impact on a whole lot of different supply chains. And then we've also got the issue of the transport bans. Black Sea shipping at the moment is basically at a standstill. That impacts anything that you might be getting from Black Sea countries, not just Ukraine, Russia, but also Moldova. A lot of their exports would be going through the port of Odessa. They aren't right now. But also we're looking at air transport. Air transport between Europe and Northeast Asia in particular, the routes that they're now taking should be going over Russia, aren't at the moment. They're going over the North Pole or down towards southern part of Asia. That adds flight time. That adds several hours of flight time to these routes. That also means more fuel on board, which means less capacity. So capacity on air transport on these routes right now is down by about 20%.
That's incredible. You know, people have been witnessing these horrifying scenes of people trying to flee, the shortages that we're told about in many cities, and there's been a flood of charity being sent to Ukraine. Is it helpful? Does it reach those in need?
This is a very, very difficult area. Of course, people are very moved by these terrible images, and we do get the feeling it would be really nice to donate something, to send some stuffed animals to these poor children and so on. But I'm in contact with colleagues who are currently working, for example, in Poland, where most of the refugees have come to. And what they are saying, it's very difficult that all of these well-meant donations are really clogging up space at the border, because a lot of people who have donated have not really thought about how's warehousing going to be arranged? Where are these things going to be stored? How exactly are they going to be distributed? So sending items just to dump them at the border doesn't really help and is at risk of just causing a lot of waste products in the end. So the advice from most large organizations in this area is donate money, let large humanitarian organizations actually buy the things that are needed right now and also be able to distribute them into Ukraine, which is of course very dangerous and very difficult at this time, and to actually be able to reach people with also the benefit of being able to buy in bulk and being able to buy more locally, so not incurring cost of trucking something all the way across Europe and all of the extra paperwork that entails.
Good advice indeed. Send the money rather than goods. Sarah, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.